Viserys I Targaryen's final hours unfolded not in public ceremony, but in quiet confusion within the Red Keep. His body had long been failing, and by this moment his words no longer carried the clarity they once did. In this fragile state, Viserys spoke of succession, prophecy, and the future of the realm, believing he addressed his daughter and named heir. Yet those who heard him did not share his certainty. His final words, shaped by illness and fading strength, were fragmented, vulnerable, and open to interpretation. What Viserys intended as reassurance became the seed of division. Those closest to him heard what they wished to hear, filtering his meaning through ambition and fear. This single moment did not create the coming conflict, but it sharpened it. When Viserys fell silent, uncertainty remained, not about his death, but about his will. The realm would soon learn how dangerous misunderstood words could become. With Viserys I no longer able to speak for the realm, power did not pause, it shifted quietly. Within the Red Keep, a small circle of nobles and officials gathered in secrecy, not to mourn, but to decide the future before the kingdom could react. This assembly, later remembered as the Green Council, did not announce itself with banners or proclamations. Its strength lay in silence, speed, and control of information. The king's death was concealed, gates were closed, messengers delayed, and loyalties quietly tested. Those present acted not out of unity, but urgency, aware that hesitation could undo everything they intended to secure. The council's actions did not yet spill blood, but they set events in motion that could not be undone. By the time the city slept, decisions had already been made, decisions that would fracture the realm before dawn. Viserys I's death did not bring clarity to the Iron Throne. Instead, it created a vacuum filled not by law, but by secrecy. While the realm remained unaware, a small circle of power moved swiftly within the Red Keep. The Green Council chose silence over proclamation, fear over transparency. Aegon, Viserys' eldest son by Alicent Hightower, was crowned not before the people of Westeros, but behind locked doors, away from oaths once sworn to Rhaenyra. This coronation was not a celebration of unity, it was an act of containment. The crown was placed quickly, quietly, as if delay itself were a threat. By denying witnesses, the Greens controlled the narrative before it could be challenged. This moment did not begin the war openly, but it ensured one was inevitable. The Iron Throne was claimed without consent, and secrecy became the first weapon of the coming conflict. The secret coronation did more than place a crown upon Aegon's head. It shattered the legal order that had held the realm together. For years, oaths sworn across Westeros had recognized Rhaenyra as Viserys' chosen heir. Lords had bent the knee, banners had been raised in acknowledgement, and the line of succession had been publicly affirmed. By crowning Aegon in secrecy, the Greens did not merely choose a different ruler, they invalidated the very mechanism by which kingship was meant to pass. Law was replaced by convenience, precedent by urgency. This act transformed a disputed succession into an undeniable breach of order. From this moment forward, loyalty would no longer hinge on law, but on force and timing. The realm had not yet erupted into war, but its foundation had cracked. With the law broken, conflict became not a possibility, but a certainty waiting for its moment. Viserys I's death does not reach Dragonstone as a clear proclamation, but as a rupture. News arrives fractured, carried by silence rather than ceremony. For Rhaenyra Targaryen, the meaning is immediate and irreversible. She had been named heir before the realm, sworn to by lords who now hesitate or vanish. The absence of a formal summons from King's Landing speaks louder than any raven. On Dragonstone, the ancient seat of Targaryen power, legitimacy is no longer theoretical, it must be claimed. Rhaenyra's declaration is not born of ambition alone, but of survival. To remain silent is to accept erasure. To wait is to surrender the future of her children and the vows once sworn to her. When she claims the crown, it is done without pageantry, without joy. This is not a celebration, it is a line drawn. From this moment, Westeros does not face a question of succession, but the certainty of division. Rhaenyra's declaration does not end uncertainty, it concentrates it. With the crown claimed, the next step is survival through structure. Dragonstone becomes more than a refuge, it becomes a command center. Lords loyal to her cause begin to arrive, not in celebration, but in urgency. Their presence reflects a divided realm where allegiance must be formalized before it dissolves. The gathering that follows is quiet, deliberate, and calculated. This is not a council born of confidence, but of necessity. Each decision weighs heavily, for every move risks war. The council's formation marks the first organized resistance to the actions taken in King's Landing. Strategies replace vows, and preparation replaces hope. From this moment forward, Rhaenyra's claim is no longer personal, it becomes institutional. The Black Council does not seek compromise, it exists to prepare for confrontation that all present understand is now unavoidable. With the Black Council barely formed, restraint immediately faces opposition. Daemon Targaryen views delay not as caution, but as weakness. From his perspective, every moment of silence strengthens the usurpation taking root in King's Landing. He argues that war, once inevitable, must be seized early, before hesitation fractures loyalty. His position is shaped by experience, not patience. Daemon understands force, speed, and decisive action, and he mistrusts councils that speak longer than they strike. The gathering becomes tense as urgency clashes with caution. Some fear that immediate war will cost the realm everything. Daemon fears that waiting will cost them the throne itself. This moment marks a crucial divide within Rhaenyra's supporters. Strategy is no longer unified. The question is no longer whether war will come, but whether it will be controlled or unleashed. With the Black Council's resolve hardening, the first true act of war begins not with swords, but with messages. Ravens are dispatched from Dragonstone carrying sealed commands to distant lords, summons that cannot be ignored. These are not requests for debate, but calls to choose sides. Each raven carries urgency, binding noble houses to decisions that will soon spill blood. Across Westeros, keeps stir as maesters break wax seals and banners are quietly prepared. Some lords hesitate, weighing oaths against survival, while others move at once, fearing delay more than war. This moment transforms political tension into military reality. The realm does not yet burn, but it has been marked. From this point forward, neutrality becomes impossible. The war has begun to travel faster than armies, carried on black wings across the sky. As ravens reach every corner of Westeros, the war ceases to be a distant threat and becomes a personal decision for the great houses of the realm. Lords gather in torch-lit halls, surrounded by maps, banners, and silent advisors, weighing ancient oaths against present danger. Some houses move swiftly, bound by loyalty, blood, or long-standing alliances, while others delay, hoping the storm might pass without them. Old rivalries resurface as political memory proves stronger than fear. Choosing a side is no longer about belief, but survival. Once banners are raised, there is no return to neutrality. These decisions, made far from battlefields, will determine where armies march and where blood will fall. The dance of the dragons expands beyond royal courts, embedding itself into the foundations of Westerosi power. The realm fractures, not by fire yet, but by choice. With allegiances declared and banners chosen, Westeros enters a tense and irreversible phase. The realm does not yet burn, but it tightens like a drawn bow. Castles reinforce gates, armories are opened, and ancient roads begin to stir with movement. Lords who once debated now prepare, knowing hesitation may prove fatal. Small folk sense the shift before the first battle is fought. Markets empty faster, whispers travel faster than ravens, and fear settles into daily life. This is not war yet, but preparation for it, the silent mobilization of a continent accustomed to violence. The balance that once held the Seven Kingdoms together begins to strain under the weight of anticipation. Every decision made in these days will soon echo across battlefields. Westeros braces itself, aware that once the first blow is struck, restraint will vanish, and survival will demand allegiance, sacrifice, and blood. As war looms but has not yet erupted, diplomacy becomes the last fragile barrier between restraint and catastrophe. Rhaenyra Targaryen chooses envoys rather than armies, sending her sons to secure loyalty through blood ties and old oaths. Lucerys Velaryon, still young and untested, is dispatched south to Storm's End, carrying words instead of weapons. The mission appears simple: remind House Baratheon of promises once sworn to his mother. Yet the journey itself reveals the danger of the moment. Westeros is no longer neutral ground, and even messengers move through a land sharpened by fear. Lucerys does not ride as a warrior, but as a symbol of legitimacy, and symbols are vulnerable. What begins as diplomacy carries the weight of consequence, for once children are sent into contested halls, the war has already begun in spirit, if not yet in flame. What was meant to be a simple diplomatic visit becomes a moment of irreversible tension within the walls of Storm's End. Lucerys Velaryon enters the stronghold as an envoy, not a warrior, carrying only his mother's words and the fragile authority they represent. Yet the hall is no longer neutral ground. The atmosphere is heavy with expectation, banners watching in silence as old loyalties collide with new ambitions. Another claimant's presence transforms the space from a place of welcome into one of confrontation. No blades are drawn and no blows are struck, but the balance of power is tested openly. Lucerys is reminded that oaths spoken in the past carry different weight in a divided realm. This encounter does not erupt into violence, yet it exposes how diplomacy has become dangerous. Within these stone walls, the dance of the dragons moves one step closer to bloodshed. The storm over Shipbreaker Bay turns a moment of departure into a fatal pursuit. Lucerys Velaryon leaves Storm's End carrying no weapon and no army, believing that diplomacy, however fragile, has been fulfilled. Yet the sky itself becomes contested ground. Another dragon rises into the clouds, transforming the storm into a battlefield ruled by impulse rather than command. What follows is not a planned engagement, but an uncontrolled escalation, power unleashed without restraint. Thunder and wind erase any chance of retreat, and the vast distance between rider and dragon collapses into chaos. The loss that follows is sudden and irreversible. Lucerys does not fall in battle as a warrior, he is erased as a messenger. His death marks the end of diplomacy in the Dance of the Dragons. From this moment forward, the war is no longer anticipated. It has begun, written into the sky with fire and loss. The death of Lucerys Velaryon does not remain an isolated tragedy. It travels faster than ravens, carried by fear, grief, and anger into every hall of power across Westeros. This moment marks the first royal blood spilled in what can no longer be contained as political rivalry. The fragile balance that once restrained open conflict collapses under the weight of loss. Grief hardens into resolve, and hesitation becomes impossible. What was once a struggle over succession now transforms into a war driven by vengeance and inevitability. Lords who hope to remain neutral are forced to choose, not by banners, but by silence and survival. The death of a prince removes the final illusion that restraint still exists. From this point forward, every decision will be shaped by the knowledge that blood has already been paid. The dance of the dragons has crossed its first irreversible threshold. The killing of a prince cannot be answered with silence. Across Dragonstone and beyond, grief hardens into purpose. The death of Lucerys is no longer mourned as a loss, but measured as a debt. Restraint, once defended as wisdom, is now condemned as weakness. Those closest to the Black cause understand that peace has already failed. The war has begun not with banners or declarations, but with blood unanswered. Vengeance becomes a political necessity, not a personal desire. To allow the first royal death to go unpunished would signal submission, inviting further violence. This moment marks the transformation of strategy into retaliation. The conflict shifts from preparation to intent. The demand is no longer for justice through counsels or words, but for an answer written in equal loss. From this point forward, mercy is no longer considered strength. Blood now demands blood. Vengeance does not always march beneath banners. Sometimes it moves quietly, carried by men without names and orders spoken only once. After the demand for blood is accepted, the response is shaped not as open war, but as calculated terror. The decision is made to strike where armor and dragons cannot protect. This is not a battlefield choice, but a political one, meant to wound the enemy's sense of safety rather than their armies. The act is conceived in secrecy, insulated from public knowledge, and entrusted to figures whose loyalty is bought through fear and coin. No proclamations follow, no councils are informed. The assassins are not symbols of honor, but tools of escalation. Their departure marks the first deliberate step into irreversible cruelty. From this moment forward, the conflict abandons restraint entirely. What began as succession dispute now turns into personal annihilation, setting the tone for a war that will consume innocents as readily as soldiers. The Red Keep, long believed to be the safest stronghold in the realm, becomes the stage for an act that shatters all remaining illusions of restraint. The murder does not occur during battle, nor under banners of war, but in the quiet heart of royal security. This event is not defined by chaos, but by control. The assassins move with precision, exploiting familiarity, routine, and silence. Guards remain unaware, corridors remain unchallenged, and the walls that once symbolized royal protection instead conceal betrayal. The killing itself is swift, deliberate, and deeply personal, designed not to weaken armies, but to break resolve. It sends a message louder than any declaration of war. Nowhere is safe, not even the seat of kings. With this act, the conflict crosses an irreversible boundary. The war is no longer fought only by dragons and soldiers, but by fear carried into private chambers. From this moment forward, the struggle becomes total, and mercy disappears entirely from the calculus of power. The death of the heir transforms secret violence into undeniable catastrophe. What was once hidden within corridors now erupts into public consequence. The killing is not an accident of war, nor a clash of armies, but a calculated removal of the future itself. The realm understands immediately what has been taken. This was not merely a life ended, but continuity severed. The act sends shock through every court and castle, for it proves that lineage offers no protection and youth no mercy. Mourning spreads faster than fear, and with it comes fury. The balance that once restrained the conflict collapses under the weight of this loss. From this moment, restraint becomes impossible. Alliances harden, vengeance replaces hesitation, and the war sheds any remaining pretense of legitimacy. The slaying of the heir marks the point of no return, where reconciliation dies alongside innocence, and the struggle for the Iron Throne becomes a war without boundaries. The killing of the heir does not remain contained within the walls where it occurred. News escapes faster than armies ever could, carried by riders, whispers, and terrified silence. Across Westeros, courts freeze as the meaning of the act becomes clear. Lords who once hesitated now understand that neutrality has become impossible. The murder is discussed not as rumor, but as certainty, and certainty breeds fear. Castles close their gates, councils convene in haste. Alliances that once felt theoretical now demand commitment. Even those far from the capital feel the tremor, for the act proves that no rank, age, or bloodline guarantees safety. The realm does not erupt immediately into chaos. Instead, it tightens, like a held breath before a scream. This moment marks the spread of dread from a single chamber into the fabric of the Seven Kingdoms, transforming private violence into a realm-wide reckoning. With the blood of an heir spilled, peace no longer exists as a political option. What remains is only delay. Across the Seven Kingdoms, rulers understand that negotiation has lost its meaning because the act itself has rewritten the rules of restraint. Messages are no longer framed in caution, but in preparation. Lords who once counseled patience now ready defenses, knowing that mercy will be read as weakness. The machinery of war begins to turn quietly, without proclamation or banner. Supply lines are assessed, keeps reinforced, and swords sharpened in silence. This is not the chaos of open conflict yet, but something colder and more dangerous: inevitability. Every decision now assumes violence as its conclusion. The realm does not argue over whether war will come, only over who will strike first and who will survive long enough to matter. The path back to peace has vanished, not with a declaration, but with understanding. Once the decision for war has settled into certainty, movement follows. Across Westeros, armies begin to leave the safety of their strongholds, not in triumph, but in grim acceptance. Lords issue orders without ceremony, knowing that delay only favors the enemy. Columns of men form along ancient roads, banners still furled, as if unwilling to announce what has begun. These are not the marches of conquest, but of obligation. Each host moves with caution, measuring distance, supply, and loyalty, aware that alliances may fracture before the first clash. The land itself feels the weight of preparation, fields emptied, villages tense, bridges guarded. War has not yet erupted into chaos, but its presence is unmistakable. With every step forward, the realm moves further from peace and closer to a conflict that will reshape bloodlines, borders, and memory itself. The Riverlands are the first to feel the true cost of the coming war. Situated between rival powers and bound by old roads and crossings, the region becomes a battlefield before a single formal declaration is finished. Armies move through its fields not to claim victory, but to deny resources to the enemy. Villages are emptied, granaries seized, bridges fortified or destroyed. The lords of the Riverlands find themselves forced into choices that offer no safety. Submission invites occupation. Resistance invites devastation. Skirmishes erupt without banners or ceremony, fought by men who know the land too well. Rivers that once carried trade now mark lines of danger. This is not yet the Great War of Dragons, but its foundation, a land broken early so that greater battles may follow. From this moment on, the Riverlands are no longer neutral ground, they are the war itself. The war crosses an irreversible line when dragons are no longer symbols of authority, but instruments of deliberate destruction. What begins as intimidation quickly becomes strategy. Entire regions are brought to submission not by armies alone, but by the threat from above. The presence of dragons reshapes the logic of war. Castles lose their value, walls lose their meaning, and supply lines become exposed targets. Lords who once debated allegiance now decide in silence, knowing resistance invites annihilation. Fields burn not to win territory, but to deny survival. The sky itself becomes contested ground. This is not conquest as Aegon once practiced it, but civil war turned inward, where dragons are unleashed against the realm they were meant to unify. From this moment forward, restraint weakens, escalation becomes inevitable, and the war begins to devour the very foundations of Targaryen power. The war descends from battlefields into streets and marketplaces. Towns that once stood neutral are reduced to ash, not for resistance, but for proximity. Dragonfire no longer signals a warming. It arrives without negotiation, without heralds, without mercy. The destruction is not strategic in the old sense, it is exemplary. Each burning settlement sends a message to the next: obedience or ruin. Stone cracks, timber collapses, and the rhythms of civilian life vanish beneath fire and smoke. The cost is no longer measured in banners lost or castles taken, but in displaced populations and erased communities. Word spreads faster than armies ever could. Fear becomes contagious. In this phase of the war, victory is not about territory, it is about terror shaping behavior. The realm begins to understand that survival itself has become conditional. What began as destruction now becomes calculation. Fear is no longer a byproduct of war, it is deliberately cultivated, measured, and deployed. Commanders learned that a single burned town can paralyze 10 more without a sword being drawn. Lords delay decisions, small folk flee before banners appear, and resistance collapses under the weight of anticipation alone. The presence of dragons reshapes strategy even when they are absent. Councils plan not where to fight, but where fear will travel fastest. Roads empty, harvests fail, and loyalty erodes under uncertainty. The war advances without marching. In this phase, power is exercised through rumor, memory, and expectation. The realm is no longer reacting to violence, it is reorganizing itself around the threat of it. Fear becomes the most efficient weapon the war has produced. In the north, war is not embraced lightly. Distance from the southern courts has long fostered caution, memory, and restraint. Yet as ravens arrive bearing divided claims and broken oaths, neutrality becomes impossible. The North understands that hesitation will not preserve peace, only delay the moment when choice is forced. Old loyalties, sworn generations earlier, are weighed against the cost of blood yet to be spilled. Unlike the South, where ambition drives banners upward, the North commits for reasons rooted in duty and remembrance. This decision is not marked by spectacle or celebration. It is quiet, deliberate, and final. With it, the war ceases to be a southern conflict. The realm's most distant lands step forward, not for conquest, but because order itself is at stake. The Reach does not move as one. Wealth, influence, and ambition fracture its loyalties long before swords are drawn. As the war spreads beyond whispers and into open mobilization, the great houses of the Reach hesitate, not from fear, but calculation. Old alliances conflict with newer ambitions. Some see advantage in proximity to the capital, others remember oaths sworn generations earlier. This division does not erupt into immediate violence. Instead, it manifests through silence, delayed banners, and conflicting messages sent under seal. The Reach becomes a contested ground not yet scarred by battle, but weakened by indecision. In choosing different paths, its houses ensure that the coming war will not be fought along clean lines. From this moment forward, unity in the South is an illusion. As armies move across the land, the war expands into the waters between Westeros and Essos. The narrow sea, once a corridor of trade and diplomacy, becomes a contested battlefield where ships replace banners and oaths are enforced with steel and fire. Fleets loyal to opposing claims intercept one another, not for glory, but for control of supply routes, messages, and movement. Merchant vessels are seized or destroyed, ports are blockaded, and coastal towns brace for sudden assault from the sea. These naval clashes lack the ceremony of pitched battles. They are chaotic, brutal, and decisive in silence. Control of the narrow sea begins to shape the war's momentum, determining which armies are fed, which allies arrive, and which ambitions are stranded before they ever reach land. As the dance of the dragons spread across Westeros, it became clear that neither faction could secure decisive control. The Greens held King's Landing and the Iron Throne, but their authority weakened beyond the capital's walls. The Blacks commanded Dragonstone and gained the loyalty of powerful houses, yet lacked the immediate strength to strike the heart of royal power. Military movements stalled, alliances hardened without progress, and both sides hesitated to commit their full force. Dragons existed on both banners, canceling advantage with equal threat. Lords across the realm delayed action, waiting for a clear victor that never emerged. This deadlock marked a critical stage of the war, a balance not of peace but of restraint enforced by fear. Each passing moment deepened division, ensuring that when the balance finally broke, it would do so with irreversible violence. With no decisive victory achieved, the conflict widened beyond its original centers of power. What began as a struggle between rival claimants now consumed the wider realm. Lords who had hesitated were forced to choose, not out of loyalty, but survival. Armies marched from the Riverlands to the Reach, from the Crownlands toward the north. Roads once used for trade carried soldiers instead, and castles prepared for sieges they never expected to face. Communication slowed as ravens carried contradictory orders, while regional commanders acted independently. The war ceased to be controlled from councils and thrones. It became fragmented, local, and increasingly brutal. Each region fought its own version of the dance, driven by old rivalries and new fears. As fronts multiplied, coordination weakened, ensuring that the conflict would last longer and cost far more than either side had planned. Until this moment, Rhaenys Targaryen had remained a symbol rather than a weapon, a presence felt through lineage, alliances, and restraint. That balance ended when the war crossed a threshold from maneuvering into confrontation. Faced with mounting losses and collapsing deterrence, the Black Cause committed one of its most formidable figures to open battle. Rhaenys did not enter as a reckless challenger, but as a calculated response to escalation. Her involvement signaled that restraint was no longer sufficient to contain the conflict. Once dragons were committed to the battlefield by both sides, neutrality vanished. The decision reshaped the war's tone, transforming it from a contest of claims into a struggle of survival. With her entry, the dance crossed into a phase where bloodlines themselves became weapons, and where every engagement risked irreversible loss. As open conflict spread across Westeros, the Green faction shifted from reaction to calculation. Rather than meeting force with force, they began shaping the battlefield before swords were ever drawn. Information became a weapon, movements were observed, messages intercepted, and loyalties quietly tested. The Greens understood that dragons alone would not decide the war, timing and isolation would. A trap was laid not through spectacle, but through patience. Strategic locations were left seemingly exposed, while forces repositioned out of sight. The goal was not immediate victory, but the creation of a moment where an enemy would be compelled to act alone. This phase of the war marked a return to political warfare beneath the noise of marching armies. What appeared calm on the surface concealed a tightening net designed to turn confidence into vulnerability and movement into fatal commitment. The war reached a new and irreversible stage when dragons were no longer held in reserve. What had once been a threat hovering above the conflict now descended into open violence. High above the fields and keeps of Westeros, shadows crossed the clouds as rival dragons closed on one another. This was not spectacle, but escalation. The sound of wings alone carried terror across miles, freezing armies that could only watch. The clash in the sky marked the moment when restraint collapsed. Fire met fire, not as a symbol, but as a weapon unleashed. Below, banners fell still as men realized that no shield or formation could matter against such power. The dance of the dragons ceased to be a struggle of claims and councils. It became a war of annihilation, where control of the sky meant control of fate. From this point forward, no victory would come without ruin. The war claimed its first great dragon rider not through accident, but through calculated escalation. Rhaenys Targaryen entered open battle knowing that restraint had already failed. What followed was not a duel of honor, but a convergence of overwhelming force. Above the battlefield, dragons collided in a violent storm of fire and shadow. The sky itself became hostile. When dragonfire struck, it did not distinguish between courage and fate. Rhaenys' fall sent a shock through both factions. Her death proved that dragon riders were no longer untouchable, and that the war would consume even those born to command the skies. Below, armies froze in silence as her dragon fell from the clouds. The moment reshaped the conflict entirely. From this point forward, every rider understood that survival was no longer guaranteed. Power had turned inward, devouring its own. The death of Rhaenys altered the balance of the war in a way no council decree ever could. Until this moment, the conflict had been fueled by threats, alliances, and restrained violence. Now, the illusion of control collapsed. Both factions recognized that dragon riders were no longer symbols of dominance, but liabilities bound to the same fate as armies below. Commanders recalculated their strategies overnight. Lords who had hesitated now chose sides openly, believing delay meant destruction. Military movements accelerated across Westeros as fear replaced caution. What had once been a political struggle hardened into a campaign of survival. The skies, once seen as a shield, became battlegrounds to be avoided or exploited without mercy. This shift did not end the war, it sharpened it. From this point forward, victory would no longer be decided by legitimacy or oaths, but by who could endure the cost of escalation the longest. With restraint abandoned and oversight gone, Aemon Targaryen transforms the war from contested struggle into deliberate devastation. No longer content with strategic victories, he turns his attention to punishment. Villages suspected of black loyalty are marked, fields are burned, and roads become corridors of fear. This phase of the conflict is not driven by necessity, but by intent. Aemon seeks to erase resistance by erasing the will to resist. His actions stretch beyond battlefields, reaching small folk who have no voice in the war, yet bear its weight. Each strike deepens the divide between green and black, ensuring that reconciliation becomes impossible. The destruction carried out under Aemon's command reshapes the conflict, signaling that this war will not end through negotiation or exhaustion, but through total ruin. From this point forward, the Dance of the Dragons ceases to be a civil dispute and becomes a campaign of annihilation. Harrenhal, the largest and most cursed fortress in Westeros, did not fall through siege or negotiation. It fell through abandonment and fear. As the Dance of the Dragons widened, the castle's size became its weakness. Its garrison was thin, its loyalty uncertain, and its reputation heavier than its defenses. When the forces aligned with the Blacks approached, resistance never truly formed. Lords and soldiers alike understood what Harrenhal represented in war, not protection, but inevitability. Control of Harrenhal meant dominance over the riverlands, supply routes, and the psychological center of the conflict. The castle's fall signaled a shift from scattered violence to strategic occupation. No banners were proudly lowered, no heroic stand recorded. Harrenhal changed hands quietly, reinforcing a growing truth across Westeros that fear, exhaustion, and calculation were now stronger forces than honor or tradition. The war had entered a phase where territory mattered more than loyalty, and silence replaced defiance. With open war now unavoidable, the conflict shifted from declarations to movement. The Dance of the Dragons entered a new phase, one defined not by pitched battles, but by pursuit. Forces loyal to both factions began hunting advantage rather than holding ground. Messengers rode without rest, armies marched along uncertain roads, and targets were chosen not for honor, but for vulnerability. This was no longer a war of symbols or claims. It became a contest of speed, reach, and intimidation. River crossings, mountain passes, and isolated strongholds suddenly mattered more than thrones or councils. Each side sought to strike first, not to win outright, but to weaken resolve and stretch enemy defenses thin. The pursuit itself became a weapon, relentless, exhausting, and merciless. From this moment forward, survival depended not on banners or lineage, but on who could move faster, strike harder, and disappear before retaliation arrived. The war had begun to hunt itself forward. The war reached a moment of violent convergence above the dark waters of the God's Eye. What had once been maneuver and intimidation now transformed into open annihilation. Two dragons met in the sky, not as symbols of royal authority, but as instruments of mutual destruction. The lake below reflected fire, shadow, and falling ash as the balance of the war tilted in seconds rather than years. This clash was not a battle of armies, but of legacies. Ancient power turned inward, devouring itself. The skies became a battlefield where no retreat was possible and no victory could be clean. The violence unleashed above the God's Eye sent shockwaves across Westeros, not because of its scale, but because of what it represented. The moment when dragons, once the foundation of Targaryen supremacy, became the greatest threat to their own survival. From this point forward, the war could no longer be contained. The sky itself had declared war. The War of Dragons reached its most final and irreversible moment above the God's Eye. What began as a personal vendetta, fueled by blood and loss, ended as a convergence of two forces that could no longer exist in the same world. Daemon Targaryen and Aemon Targaryen did not fall as commanders of armies, but as embodiments of the war itself. Their deaths did not end the conflict, but they removed its most violent accelerants. The sky that once belonged exclusively to House Targaryen became a grave, swallowing fire, steel, and ambition in equal measure. This was not victory for either side, it was subtraction, the removal of two figures whose existence guaranteed further devastation. Across Westeros, news of their deaths spread not as triumph, but as stunned realization. The dance of the dragons had crossed a threshold from which no restoration of the old order was possible. Dragons had slain dragons, kin had slain kin, and the cost could no longer be denied. By the time the war reached the God's Eye, its most dangerous commanders were no longer young men chasing glory. Daemon Targaryen, hardened by nearly 5 decades of violence, politics, and war, chose to end the conflict as he had always lived within it, by direct action. Across the sky rose Aegon Targaryen, not yet 20, shaped by years of resentment and ambition far heavier than his age. This meeting was not arranged by armies or councils, it was deliberate and personal. Above the dark waters, the distance between experience and youth vanished. What followed was brief, brutal, and final. When the clash ended, neither commander returned. With their deaths, the war lost its sharpest weapons. The struggle did not end, but it was forever changed, deprived of the men who had driven its violence with ruthless clarity. When Rhaenyra Targaryen moved on King's Landing, the war had already hollowed the city from within. Years of fear, executions, and hunger had broken loyalty long before her arrival. The treasury had been emptied, the court had fractured. What remained of the garrison stayed at its posts not out of belief, but out of habit and exhaustion. Rhaenyra did not approach the capital as a conqueror seeking glory. She advanced as a claimant, reclaiming a seat denied to her by force and deception. No armies met her outside the walls. No streets ran with blood. The gates opened because there was no will left to close them. When she entered the Red Keep, it was not greeted with cheers, only silence and watchful resentment. This moment marked a decisive turn in the war. The Iron Throne passed into Rhaenyra's hands without resistance, yet the victory carried no peace. She had taken the city intact, but inherited a capital wounded, unstable, and already poised to turn against its new ruler. Once seated in the capital, Rhaenyra quickly discovered that possession of the Iron Throne did not bring obedience. King's Landing was restless, wounded by years of war and misrule. Food was scarce, coin was gone, and trust had evaporated. Faced with resistance, both open and hidden, her rule hardened. Justice became swift and unforgiving. Suspected enemies were punished, former loyalties questioned, and dissent answered with severity rather than reconciliation. Each decision, meant to secure control, instead deepened resentment. Fear replaced loyalty as the tool of governance. The city obeyed, but only outwardly. Within the Red Keep, isolation grew. Councils fractured under pressure, and every rumor carried the weight of betrayal. Rhaenyra ruled from the throne, but the ground beneath her authority was unstable. What had been taken without battle now required constant force to hold. This phase of her reign did not collapse the war, but it poisoned her hold on the capital, ensuring that unrest would soon turn inward with consequences she could no longer contain. The collapse of order in King's Landing reached its most violent expression at the Dragon Pit. Long feared and misunderstood, the dragons had come to represent not protection but suffering in the eyes of the people. Hunger, anger, and fear fused into a single force, and the crowd moved with destructive purpose. What followed was not a battle between armies, but a surge of uncontrolled violence. The Dragon Pit, once a symbol of royal power, became a prison of stone and flame. Confined creatures lashed out in panic as the structure failed around them. Fire and falling masonry turned chaos into catastrophe. By dawn, the Dragon Pit was ruined. Dragons lay dead beneath shattered stone, and the last great symbol of Targaryen dominance within the city was erased. This event did more than destroy a building. It shattered the balance of the war itself. Power that had once ruled through fear of dragons now stood exposed, weakened, and vulnerable to forces it could no longer command. The collapse of order did not end with the destruction of symbols. It spread into the streets. In King's Landing, hunger and fear hardened into anger, and anger found its target. The crown no longer represented protection or justice. It became a source of blame for every empty bowl and every lost child. Whispers turned into shouts. Shouts became movement. Crowds gathered not in celebration, but in accusation. Taxes, punishments, and shortages fused into a single belief that the city was being ruled against its own people. Authority still existed on paper, but in practice, it was shrinking by the hour. Guards remained visible, yet their presence inspired resentment rather than obedience. Stones replaced words, doors were barred. The capital began to police itself through fear and rumor. This moment did not overthrow the crown outright, but it marked a critical shift. The city had turned inward, and the bond between ruler and people was broken. From this point on, rule depended not on legitimacy, but on force, and even that was beginning to fail. By the time Rhaenyra accepted the truth, King's Landing was no longer hers to rule. Authority had thinned into isolation, and isolation had become danger. The streets no longer obeyed. Guards hesitated. Rumors moved faster than orders. What had begun as unrest now pressed inward toward the Red Keep itself. The Queen's presence, once a symbol of claim and resolve, had become a rallying point for anger. Each night brought new threats, whispered plans, and signs that control had slipped beyond recovery. To remain was to invite capture or death, not only for herself, but for those still loyal. The decision to flee was not made from weakness, but necessity. Rhaenyra departed the capital quietly, without banners or ceremony. There was no escort of cheering crowds, only urgency and fear. With her departure, the illusion of royal rule in King's Landing collapsed entirely. The city she had taken without battle was lost without one as well, marking a decisive reversal in the war and scattering her remaining strength into flight rather than command. Dragonstone had always been a place of refuge and legacy, but for Rhaenyra it became a trap. Exhausted, isolated, and pursued, she returned to the ancestral seat believing it still loyal. What she found instead was silence sharpened by fear and calculation. The war had drained allegiance even from those who once swore unbreakable oaths. Within the fortress, whispers moved faster than trust. The garrison weighed survival over loyalty, and hidden negotiations sealed her fate before she understood the danger. When the moment came, there was no battle, no warning. Doors closed, paths narrowed, and resistance vanished. Betrayal did what armies could not. Rhaenyra was seized not by overwhelming force, but by the collapse of faith around her. Dragonstone, symbol of her birthright, delivered her as a prisoner rather than a queen. This act of treachery did more than end her flight. It stripped the war of its last illusion of honor. From this moment forward, events would move swiftly toward final bloodshed, driven not by claims or banners, but by vengeance and fear. Rhaenyra's flight ended not in battle, but in confinement. After the betrayal at Dragonstone, resistance was no longer possible. The fortress that had once represented safety and inheritance became a sealed prison. Guards who had sworn loyalty now acted with careful distance, enforcing orders rather than oaths. Her capture was deliberate and controlled. There was no public struggle, no attempt at rescue, and no open defiance. Power had shifted completely, and with it the confidence of those who now held authority. Rhaenyra was isolated, stripped of command, and placed under watch as a political prize rather than a reigning queen. This moment marked the final collapse of her claim in practical terms. Armies still fought elsewhere, but the war's central figure was no longer free to command them. The conflict moved beyond rivalry and strategy into vengeance and final reckoning. With Rhaenyra captured, the war lost its balance entirely. From this point forward, events would accelerate toward irreversible outcomes, driven by fear, retribution, and the certainty that mercy had vanished from the struggle. Rhaenyra's captivity ended in finality on Dragonstone. There was no trial, no negotiation, and no appeal to mercy. Power had narrowed to a single decision, and that decision was carried out without hesitation. The act was not meant to be hidden, it was meant to be unmistakable. She was brought to a place where stone met open sky, watched by those who now served a different authority. The dragon did not approach as a creature of battle, but as an instrument of judgment. From a distance, fire ended what imprisonment had begun. The execution was swift, leaving no doubt that her claim was finished. With Rhaenyra's death, the war lost one of its central figures entirely. The struggle that had torn the realm apart moved into its final phase, no longer driven by competing claims, but by the consequences of everything already done. Her execution did not bring peace, it brought certainty. The dance of the dragons continued, but now without the woman for whom it had first been fought. With Rhaenyra dead, resistance in the capital collapsed into silence. King's Landing, battered by famine, fire, and fear, no longer had the strength to defy another claimant. Into this broken city returned Aegon II, scarred by war and carried by necessity rather than triumph. His return was not marked by cheers or banners, but by weary acceptance. The Iron Throne was reclaimed without challenge. There was no rival left within the city capable of contesting him. Guards resumed their duties, councils reassembled, and the machinery of rule restarted out of habit rather than loyalty. Aegon's authority rested not on popularity, but on survival. He was the last viable figure standing amid the wreckage of competing claims. Yet the throne he reclaimed was diminished. Dragons were gone. The treasury was empty. The people were hostile and exhausted. Aegon II ruled again, but over a realm stripped of strength and unity. His return did not end the war's damage, it confirmed it. The crown remained, but its power was hollow, sustained only by the absence of alternatives. Victory returned Aegon II to the Iron Throne, but it did not restore the man who had once claimed it. The king who now ruled was broken in body and diminished in strength, bearing wounds that never healed and pain that never faded. Each movement carried effort. Each day was governed by limitation rather than command. His injuries confined him. He could no longer ride freely, appear often before the people, or project authority through presence alone. Governance shifted inward, conducted through intermediaries, whispered orders, and guarded chambers. The throne remained occupied, but its occupant was increasingly absent from the life of the realm. This condition reshaped the nature of rule. Decisions slowed, authority weakened. Factions pressed closer, sensing vulnerability behind the crown. Aegon II still held power, but he held it from a position of dependence rather than dominance. The war had ended its contest for succession, yet it left the victor damaged beyond repair. The king ruled on, but as a reminder that survival and triumph were not the same, and that the crown could outlast the strength of the man who wore it. As open war faded, a quieter struggle took its place within the royal court. Power no longer rested solely on armies or dragons, but on access, influence, and timing. The king's injuries and absence from daily rule created gaps that others moved quickly to fill. Decisions were delayed, orders contradicted one another. In those pauses, ambition took root. Counselors spoke softly and listened closely. Alliances shifted behind closed doors, formed not by loyalty to the crown, but by calculation. Each faction believed itself necessary, indispensable, and ultimately entitled to rule when weakness turned into collapse. Information became a weapon more effective than steel. The court remained outwardly functional, but beneath ceremony and routine, mistrust spread. Messages were withheld, commands were questioned. Every illness, every delay, every silence was measured for opportunity. The war had taught its survivors that survival depended on foresight and betrayal alike. In this atmosphere, conspiracy was not an exception, it was governance itself. The throne still stood, but the struggle for control had moved inward, invisible yet relentless, preparing the ground for the final reckoning. The war did not end with a blade or a battlefield. It ended quietly, within walls meant to protect the king. Aegon II survived fire, wounds, and rebellion, but he could not survive the court that surrounded him. By the final days of his rule, power no longer rested in his hands alone. Decisions were filtered, access was controlled, trust had eroded beyond repair. The poisoning was deliberate and precise. No alarm was raised, no guards were summoned. What had taken armies years to fail was undone in a single, silent act. The king's death did not shock the court, it confirmed what many already knew. Authority had shifted elsewhere long before his final breath. With Aegon II gone, the last living symbol of the green claim vanished. The crown remained, but the man who wore it did not. His death closed the final chapter of the Dance of the Dragons, not with resolution, but with exhaustion and calculation. The war ended not in victory, but in survival, leaving a realm ruled by those who had learned that poison could succeed where swords could not. The death of Aegon II did not end the conflict with a decisive victory. It ended it by removing the last pillar holding the green faction upright. Without a king, without unity, and without a cause that could still command loyalty, the Greens fractured rapidly. Power that had once been enforced through authority dissolved into uncertainty and fear. In the capital, commands went unanswered, alliances unraveled as quickly as they had been formed. Lords and officials who had sworn loyalty to the Greens sought distance, silence, or survival above all else. Some fled, others waited, hoping obscurity might protect them from retribution. No single figure remained capable of rallying resistance. This collapse was not marked by battle or proclamation. It unfolded through absence. The Greens ceased to act as a faction because they no longer believed in their own future. What remained were individuals calculating how best to endure the peace that followed defeat. With their fall, the Civil War lost its final organized opposition, clearing the way for rule not defined by rivalry, but by recovery from devastation that no side had escaped unscarred. With the Greens collapsed and the capital exhausted, the war could no longer continue by force. What remained of authority turned toward survival rather than victory. The realm required a ruler who could be accepted, not feared. In this vacuum, Aegon III was chosen. He was young, untested, and shaped by loss rather than ambition. His claim carried legitimacy without the threat of renewed bloodshed. Lords and counselors accepted him not because he inspired confidence, but because he promised an end to rivalry. The choice was cautious, deliberate, and final. This decision did not heal the wounds of war, it closed them. Power passed not to a conqueror, but to a survivor. The Iron Throne endured, but its meaning had changed. Dragons were gone, houses were broken. What remained was a kingdom governed by memory of catastrophe rather than dreams of dominance. With Aegon III's selection, the dance of the dragons ended not in triumph, but in restraint. The realm chose quiet continuity over glory, and in doing so, acknowledged the cost of everything that had come before. The war ended not with celebration, but with ceremony, restrained by memory. When Aegon III was crowned, the capital gathered in silence rather than joy. He was a child shaped by loss, standing beneath the weight of a crown forged by catastrophe. The realm did not look to him for command, but for continuity. The coronation was deliberate and controlled. There were no triumphal displays, no declarations of conquest. Lords and counselors attended out of necessity, not devotion. The act itself mattered more than the boy who received it. Through him, the realm acknowledged that the struggle for succession was over. Aegon III did not inherit strength, he inherited consequence. Dragons were gone, houses diminished, and trust shattered. His youth became the reason he could be accepted, too young to threaten, too young to reopen old wounds. With the crown placed upon his head, the dance of the dragons formally ended. What followed was not peace born of victory, but stability chosen out of exhaustion, guarded carefully by those determined never to repeat what had nearly destroyed them. The war ended not with celebration, but with ceremony, restrained by memory. When Aegon III was crowned, the capital gathered in silence rather than joy. He was a child shaped by loss, standing beneath the weight of a crown forged by catastrophe. The realm did not look to him for command, but for continuity. The coronation was deliberate and controlled. There were no triumphal displays, no declarations of conquest. Lords and counselors attended out of necessity, not devotion. The act itself mattered more than the boy who received it. Through him, the realm acknowledged that the struggle for succession was over. Aegon III did not inherit strength, he inherited consequence. Dragons were gone, houses diminished, and trust shattered. His youth became the reason he could be accepted, too young to threaten, too young to reopen old wounds. With the crown placed upon his head, the dance of the dragons formally ended. What followed was not peace born of victory, but stability chosen out of exhaustion, guarded carefully by those determined never to repeat what had nearly destroyed them. When the fighting finally ceased, Westeros stood broken. The war had ended, but its damage stretched far beyond the battlefield. Cities were scarred, fields abandoned, and roads left silent. Entire regions bore the marks of fire, siege, and neglect. Victory mattered little in a realm where survival had replaced ambition. The crown remained, but its reach was weakened. Lords returned to lands they could barely govern. Harvests failed, treasuries were empty, and trust between houses had eroded. The people carried the heaviest burden. Hunger, displacement, and grief lingered long after banners were lowered. This devastation was not the result of a single battle, but of prolonged conflict that consumed resources faster than they could be restored. Dragons had burned what armies could not, and war had finished what fire began. Westeros emerged from the dance altered permanently. Power survived, but prosperity did not. The realm entered a period defined by recovery rather than expansion. What remained was a kingdom forced to rebuild slowly, haunted by the memory of a war that nearly destroyed everything it sought to rule. With a child seated on the Iron Throne, rule could no longer rest in a single pair of hands. The realm turned to regents, not as a choice, but as a necessity. Governance shifted from personal authority to collective control, designed to preserve stability while avoiding another descent into war. These regents ruled in the king's name, issuing commands, settling disputes, and restoring basic order across a shattered kingdom. Their power was defined by restraint rather than ambition. Every decision carried the memory of recent catastrophe, and every action was measured against the fear of renewed conflict. The crown endured, but it was protected by caution rather than force. This transfer marked a fundamental change in how Westeros was governed. The age of dragon-backed dominance had ended. What followed was rule by counsel, compromise, and vigilance. Regents did not promise glory, they promised survival. In their hands, power became a temporary trust, held not to conquer, but to preserve what remained until the king could rule in his own right. The realm accepted this arrangement not with hope, but with relief. The dance of the dragons ended without victory. It ended through exhaustion, loss, and irreversible change. House Targaryen survived the war, but it did not survive intact. What emerged afterward was a dynasty stripped of its greatest strength and haunted by the memory of what its power had destroyed. Dragons, once the foundation of unquestioned rule, were nearly gone. Authority no longer rested on fear of flame, but on fragile agreements and guarded compromise. The royal house remained on the throne, yet it ruled a realm that no longer believed in invincibility. The illusion of divine dominance had been shattered by bloodshed inflicted by the family upon itself. This transformation reshaped every generation that followed. Targaryen power became cautious, inward, and constrained by memory. Decisions were made with restraint, born not of wisdom, but of trauma. The war taught the dynasty its most painful lesson. Absolute power carried the seeds of its own destruction. The dance ended, but its consequences endured. From this point forward, House Targaryen ruled not as conquerors of the realm, but as survivors of a catastrophe they themselves had unleashed and could never undo. The story does not end here. The history of Westeros continues in the chapters yet to be uncovered.